My name is Panagiotis Doudesis, or Panos as everyone knows me outside Greece. I am currently a PhD candidate at the University of Cambridge at the Department of History of Art, and my research is about dining cultures in Western Europe, in early modernity, that is from the 15th to the early 19th century. Today I'm going to talk about two particular objects. One is a dictionary for women written in the early 18th century. The name of the author of this dictionary was Corvinus. He wrote under the pseudonym Amarantes. It was published in 1715 in Leipzig. The other object that is really interesting to examine would be a recipe from a handwritten cookbook of the beginning of the 18th century, written or at least conceived by a woman called Maria Euphrosina Kumberger. The name of the dictionary is the Frauenzimmer-Lexicon. It was published in 1715 in Leipzig. In today's standards, it's one of the most significant publications we have to understand how regular households outside the court aspire to function, not only in Saxony but also in the wider German-speaking world. The kind of advice Amarantes gave to all the women ranged from how to organize the pantry, to how to make the bed in the morning, to how many pots and pans you have to keep, how to behave. Very big part of the book is about cooking and presenting, serving the cooked food, which was an important activity at the time. In the 18th century, people ate in Europe in a completely different way than the way we eat today. There was a system called service à la française. This particular type of service, of serving the meal, dictated that the layout of the table should remain the same and unchanged throughout the several courses. The servers and the steward, or the lady of the house, would know beforehand where each dish and platter would go in any given time during the meal. The meal was organized in courses, normally 2 to 3 courses, including dessert. The first course was starters, some soups, some stews perhaps. Then the second course was the main one. And then you would have the table cleared completely, tablecloths included, and have the dessert served on the same table. Or if you had enough rooms, you would move to another room for the dessert course. It was an incredibly stressful aspect of the meal. Perhaps it was one of the reasons why the à la française was abandoned by mid-19th century. And now, as we do nowadays, we follow the à la Russe system of eating, where you don't arrange the food in space, but in time. You only serve one dish at a time. And you make sure that the dish is freshly made and also as hot or as warm or cold as you would like it to be. This book, this particular 1,000 pages long book, the first publication was in 1715, but there are subsequent publications, updated ones, throughout the 18th century, and that shows how significant that book had been at the time, which makes it even more significant and important artifact of the past to extract information from today. Maria Euphrosina Kumberger lived from the late 17th century to the middle of the 18th century. She lived in the area of Laufen in Germany. She produced a wonderful compilation of recipes of the time, and we will examine one of those. Handwritten cookbooks became increasingly trendy from the end of the 17th century through to the beginning of the 19th. And we must think of culinary publications of the time in a similar and dissimilar way at the same time from what we have today. The famous cooks did produce publications, so recipe books, cookbooks, from the early Renaissance onwards in Europe. But handwritten cookbooks were a rarity, and this allowed the persons who produced them, who weren't as literate and as well connected, express and share this knowledge they had. In the beginning of this trend of handwritten cookbooks, it was a genre of books that came from women and towards women, although we can find increasingly more men also producing handwritten cookbooks. What is interesting as well is the fact that we don't really know if the actual handwritten product is written by the cook herself or himself, because they might be illiterate, they might just know the recipes and the techniques. So the cookbook was relatively small for today's standards of cookbooks, and of course it contained no images. Kumberger's handwritten cookbook had a compilation of 285 recipes in total, and it was published in 1735. Kumberger's recipe for a very simple spinach strudel goes: to make a spinach strudel, take sautéed spinach, chop it small, also into it parsley herb with butter, lots of spices and salt, let it cool down, and then make the strudel in the known way. The most striking element in this recipe is the absence of quantities. The fact that it says take spinach without saying exactly how much, or without specifying how much salt. Even the fact that the recipe ends with the exquisite instruction, make the strudel in the known way. This kind of cookbook appealed or was aiming at experienced women or cooks of the time. Otherwise, you wouldn't know what to do. This is not a sequence of steps. I really was interested in investigating how social behaviors relate to space. And that's how I ended up exploring all these recipe books and table manners books and illustrations of dinners, of lavish banquets, or even architectural discourse around the dining room and the kitchen. You can realize how far we've gone as a society in terms of developing our food systems and our relationship with food. For example, the distance between the kitchen and the dining room was never the same. In some centuries, the kitchen had to be as far away as possible, so the food you consumed was lukewarm at the very best. But in the 19th century, the kitchens had to be very close, or food had to be transported in a very clever way from the kitchen to the dining room in order to retain its temperature. So tiny little changes in people's perception about food would have a huge impact in how we design our buildings and our cities even. So that's what I'm trying to investigate.